There we go. Okay, so this is going to be a rundown of the schema for the WriteIn app. So right now we have two collections in the Firestore. The first one called categories, where we kind of just split it up in the topics. Right now we only have 4 basic topics, but this list can kind of expand to however many we like. Right now we have keto, COVID, Olympics, and Japan. I try to keep it kind of relevant to make it easier to come up with examples. And so then we have the content collection, which then stores like the results you would get from typing in the search bar. So to quickly explain, we have different content types. Here we have a tweet, and the raw content form, we would have a link to the tweet. But then for different types like a web page, we could either have a link to the web page or link to some kind of reference to the raw web page elsewhere. This is to kind of keep it lighter weight in the collection as a whole, so we're not using a lot of memory. For the examples I've made here, the 3 content types is the web page, the tweet, and there should be a PDF here somewhere. So yeah, PDF. And so these 2 fields kind of describe the content. And so next we have the scores. And keep in mind, these 3 are the same for each document. And so the scores is, these numbers are kind of made up now, but eventually we would kind of use some machine learning model to where we feed the actual documents, and it would present us with these scores. And what these scores are is, we'll start first with the credibility score. This looks at the content and the source it came from, and it tells us kind of the credibility of the content. So for example, this PDF comes from a peer-reviewed journal on arXiv, which is just a public website that has PDFs of research papers. So it would have a higher credibility score than, say, something like a tweet, which you know isn't really peer-reviewed and it's not vetted, and it's just slightly less trustworthy. So this would be an interesting metric, I thought, for someone searching the web, because this is something I think about a lot. You know, like how quickly can I assess like the credibility of this source? And so moving on into the categories. So there's 4 items here in the categories, which represents each topic here. And so the scores say how the content relates to the category. This would be useful once we have more interesting categories and we're able to draw like a map or a bubble displaying this information. So then you'd see your topic and then how it relates to these other categories. And so this is a tweet that's a joke. And so it's not really related to any of these categories. But then if we looked at a Wikipedia page for the Summer Olympics, we can see that this credibility is higher. I mean, I did so because I trust Wikipedia most of the time. And the scores for Olympics and Japan is much higher, just because this is the Summer Olympics and it takes place in Japan. Whereas I think the COVID score is also pretty high, but the keto score is low because it's unrelated. So that kind of gives you a rough idea of the scores we could have in kind of a relationship between categories. In the future, we can extend this to many other types of scores we have, maybe like if this is biased in any way, or just whatever we think of down the road. And finally, we have the geography field. This is not in every single content.
Content type, yeah.
Yeah, it's just because, like, for example, a tweet, it would be harder to find the geography of. But if you get a source from Wikipedia, for example, they have like the coordinate for us, so you can scrape that in addition. And this would be useful like in a map situation where you can kind of show where your sources are coming from. Yeah, and that kind of concludes the schema.
Cool. Right, so the schema will be sort of like conform to the content type. It'll be sort of use that kind of presenter pattern of conforming to different types of content. And as we enrich our interface to have different presentation layer effects for these different content types, we can surface this data in meaningful ways. So, okay, cool. So that's the schema part.
Yeah.
Let's see. And so What this allows us to do is for a user who says, I want to know about Japan and keto and COVID and Olympics. What we're going to do is have this collection, this content collection. Now, I guess what I'm wondering, okay, so this isn't user specific, but same users will have the same categories. So while, so if I type into the WriteIn, you know, let's say I type in Japan and nobody's ever typed that in yet, for example, we would add that Japan to the categories, and then we would run our batch jobs to get all these credibility scores established for that category, because right, for each one of these contents, as we add categories, we're going to need to run those batch jobs to get those credibility scores.
Yeah, and I think so right now we have the categories. They're pretty. Right now it's just the name, and I think, you know, in the future we could add more fields, like maybe a counter, like how many people have searched for this, and just additional statistics relating specifically to the category that we keep track of, rather than something that comes from the web. And that would be interesting to present to the user, because it kind of shows like a less biased view of how people are using the search engine and its topics.
Yeah, this is great. So yeah, again, this is sort of a join between this content that we're surfacing. We're generating this content based on these data science algorithms to establish these credibility scores. And those credibility scores, again, are not user specific, so it's completely unbiased, totally based on the data model at rest.
Yeah, and yeah, I think it's pretty flexible too in the future. Like you can plug and play, try out different models, because a lot of them use it's like I don't know the word, but it turns it into a number representation. And so the scoring is really useful because it's like a probability representation. And so I think as the project progresses, it's definitely going to try out different models, and the models will get trained on better data. And so these scores get continuously updated. And it's just useful, I think, to have it interchangeable like this.
I think it's great. Yeah. Cool. Thank you. All right, let's look at what's next.
Yeah. So do you mean the things that Dustin and I were, or not Dustin, Uche and I were gonna work on?
Yeah, you know, do you want to show the code sandbox real quick? Do you have those handy? The draggable element React component.
Yes. Okay, so this is the autocomplete. And so these are the two examples of what I was thinking we could combine to make the search box, or the kind of input box that Dustin was talking about. We'll start here. So, right, you can imagine this is where you search for something. And like a to-do list, we can save the topic that we just searched for future use, or just like something we search a lot. And I think the additional information can go here, like a score, or you can click on it and it expands to show the information that we stored here in the Firebase with the scores. And the reason why I specifically wanted to show these two is because the interface is very like slick and premium looking. Like it's animated. It's not kind of how do you say, like,
yeah, static.
Yeah, it's just like really fluid, and I think this fits more with like it's just a nice change from, I think, the search engines that we have now, and it's definitely for a more pleasant user experience.
Yeah, I think it's a nice beginning of that Harry Potter magic book type of world that we want to create.
Yeah, the wizards.
Yeah. So cool. That's all for that, right?
Yeah. So yeah, these boxes would be like if we could use our imagination for a bit and combine these boxes with this input, these would be your topics and whatever additional information we'd like to put in there.
Sweet. Cool. So you guys are going to be working on that, and so we'll see that pretty soon here.
Yeah.
If you want to, can I go ahead and share my screen here?
Yeah.
So this work that we did this week. So this was an exploration just to kind of lay out what the basic UI is going to look like, or at least some examples and ideas to help us understand what might work. So we've got the basic, menus at the bottom kind of thing to switch between different category areas potentially. But here, I think this trending page here really is helpful and an example in higher fidelity of what was drawn in the hand sketch. And that is to have a search bar at the top. You type in something into the search bar, and then it gives us an ability to add that to a saved list. And so that saved list, we look at, or at least a ranked list anyway. Well, so here's another example where we have typing in, and then we have, or actually, sorry, this is a detail page of a topic. So yeah, so we would go from a kind of a page like this, a home page kind of experience where you've got different categories of groupings of topics, and on each category item, there's going to be icons that will allow interaction. They will be display icons to help you understand contextually what this is. We're not sure. Obviously we're still in the design phase here. So some other ideas around how to present map-based data, so that when we do have content that's map-based, we have some ideas of how to present that. And let's see, is there anything else you think about on this, Hoa, or anything else we should go over? There's this topic relator interface, that will show contextually relevant topics in a sort of two-dimensional space sort of interface with varying levels of size and boldness and potentially color to allow us to understand how these relate to each other. So
yeah, that part specifically is most interesting to me. Once you're able to, if we want to continue with the D3 route, you can just use the scores directly as a value to scale the words, or like to show the relationships a little more visually. So a high score would mean like a bigger circle or a bigger font, and the just having these numbers makes it like really cool to animate, especially when we start using vector graphics. And I just want to, that's like the super exciting part for me with the visualizing the data.
yeah, I think the first use, the most basic use of visualizing the data is to order the topics in order, right?
Yeah.
And as we talk about how we're sort of competing with Google with this, you look at what Google does, basic functionality is to order those trillions of search results.
Right.
So that's a very important function, that basic function of just ordering information based on a topic. So that's, there's lots of dimensions to explore. But anyway, yeah, and like you said, right, using those scores gives us the ability of using D3, and let's just check out D3 for just a quick fun second here. Do you have any D3 stuff you want to show? That's really cool.
I do, but none of them are saved. They check out the, let's see, they have examples on their website of like graph networks, or visualizing a graph network.
But yeah, I think Stephanie asked if we had familiarity with Neo4j, which is a graph database. Are you familiar with Neo4j?
No, I'm not. I've only heard of it. I've never used it before.
Cool. So yeah, a graph database obviously is a database that manages relationships between nodes of data. So it is something to explore. I think we should consider that. We should look at that at that because it unlocks potentially different features and functionality and allows us to look at things in the ways that we want to potentially very easily. So yeah, Neo4j is something that social networks have used. It's a powerful tool. But do you have some D3 you can share?
Yeah, and yeah, I think a graph-based database might be what you want. I'd have to look more into the benefits of that, but I do know it's like good for searching, especially like word-based data.
Well, and exactly a data relationship like this, for example.
Yeah. Okay, so this would be like an example graph that we have in D3, and the reason why I like it is, if you notice, like it's very slick. Like the animation is very smooth, and this is all like actual data you can point at. It's not just like an animation, and it's just really cool. It's like really useful to be able to play with not only like see the data, but like play with it. And so different people would have different interpretations and play with it differently, and like kind of see things in a different light and a different perspective. For word data specifically, one thing I saw recently was they had like a 3-dimensional word cloud. So it would be like this, but in 3 dimensions, and you can kind of rotate it in different ways and see different clusters. Like one cluster could be like a certain political party, and another cluster would be a different political party. And you can kind of move around this map and see what falls into these clusters. And I don't know why, but that's just like that's just crazy in my mind. That just sounds really cool.
Yeah, there was a startup back in the day in Santa Monica called The Brain, and the whole startup was based around exactly that interface you just described. I don't know if they faded away or not, but it was thebrain.com. And yeah. Yeah, there.
Oh yes, yeah, this sounds like it. Like mapping knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is kind of like the thing that the search engines like Google doesn't really have. You don't really see that map, except for what they kind of want you to see. And I think it's cool that we're kind of opening this up from a search engine perspective in the results.
Right on. Cool. All right, well, we can stop the recording, I think, for now, unless you have anything else you want to hear.
That's front end, that's back end. I think that covers it, what we're at so far.